I'd love to hear your thoughts on how different things would be if Bennet had different elements for the same kit. It's an interesting question. The main things that Bennett's element matters for are energy generation. The fact that he's Pyro means that he can battery Pyro characters better, but also, and maybe more importantly, his energy requirements will be easier to reach in teams that generate Pyro particles. If he wasn't Pyro, his ER requirements would be a lot harder to reach in Arlecchino teams, for example. Mawika teams as well. Second thing is Pyro Resonance. Pyro Resonance isn't that big of a deal, because the buff from it isn't that big. But it does mean that Bennet is a slightly better unit whenever the carry he's buffing is a Pyro carry, or a carry that relies on a Pyro support. Next, he can be played in Chevalier's teams without disabling Chevalier's passive. Is there any other... Oh yeah, next, he enables for VV setups, for double VV on a lot of teams, and even just for single VV in teams that can struggle to get a Pyro hit from the character themselves, like Hu Tao VV teams. And I guess those are like the 4 important things about Bennet. If he were a different element, these things wouldn't be there anymore, but he could gain something else in exchange, right? Bennet being Pyro doesn't really tend to allow for you to have elemental application that matters. The reactions that Pyro has are reactions that are only good if you trigger them often. If you were to be Electro or Cryo, you would be much better in physical teams, right? Superconduct is a reaction you don't need to re-trigger multiple times, so you could use Bennet as the only character of that element in a physical team. Same if you were Animo or Geo, you'd be able to use VV or Petra more reliably. What are other elemental specific buffs? Kind of it, right? If you were Dendro or Electro, he could be used for short uptime Quicken carries, because you don't need to re-trigger Quicken. He could be used as, if you were Dendro, as the only Dendro unit in a burning team. Or sorry, if you... Wait, no, I'm an idiot. That's not how that works. I take that back. What else? And that's kind of it for like elemental specific buffs that he could get if he were another element. When it comes to resonances, a lot of the other resonances wouldn't be all that good with Bennet, right? Animal resonance would kind of... I mean, animal resonance is fake. Hydro resonance wouldn't do anything for him. Dendro resonance wouldn't do much for him, because Dendro teams that care about EM tend to not care about attack. So you wouldn't want to use Bennet on them, even if you were if you were Dendro. Electro resonance would be really nice on him, and Geo and Cryo would also be fine. What are other advantages he could have if you were another element? Okay, if you were another element, it would pretty much not change anything, or like, no element other than Pyro would really be helpful for VV setups, because the only teams where you want to swirl an element that is likely to be an element that is not on the enemies, and like those a lot of the time those tend to be like the reaction teams. And the problem is because of Bennet's, or because of the elemental reaction priority, if Bennet were Cryo and you wanted to use him to swirl Cryo in like a Ganyu team, or like a Mel team in general, you would have to do that while the enemy doesn't have Pyro on them. Like at that point, why not just apply Cryo to them anyways? Because if the enemy had Pyro on them, elemental priority would make you infuse Pyro, even if you self-applied Cryo. The only team where that would matter would probably be like aggravate teams, to make setups with Nahida easier, because it would help prevent windy plant situations. But I think that's it. Yeah, there's also his C6 that could matter. It would generally just be worse if he were another element, because other infusions aren't as useful as Pyro. The only teams where a specific infusion type tends to actually be very useful are plunge reaction teams. For plunge reaction teams, like if he were any element other than Pyro, Hydro, or Cryo, it would be bad, right? If he were Cryo, it would enable plunge with Pyro units. But that would not be that good. Pyro tends to have application that's fast enough that you'd rather have a Hydro infusion than a Pyro one. Candace isn't really used for plunge teams because all she provides is an infusion. If you had a Hydro Bennet, I do think you would see some Hydro forward vape plungers, either with Mawika or with Xiangling. Also, if you were Cryo and you self-applied Cryo, you'd have Cryo on you. And having Cryo on you slows you down. So, like, no one would want Cryo Bennet, okay? Like, trust me, no one would fucking want Cryo Bennet. Trust me, you don't want that shit, man. Is her buff better for an Electro DPS than Sara's? So, if you look at the attack buff on Sara, right? She has, what, 195 base plus, like, 565, so 750-ish. This is... Sara's attack buff should be a little bit lower, but not that much lower. But it's not reliant on movement. The problem is Sara's energy generation is fucking sus. And before constellations, that's all she gives. Like, this attack buff is all she gives. And the duration is shorter. So it's basically, if you're looking at constellation versus constellation, right? The attack buff is very similar, like the flat attack buff. So it's 60% crit damage versus 65 damage percent plus 30% attack. Iansan should be better. But if you already have someone else on Cinder City, Sara's buff should be bigger. Because a good part of what makes Iansan good is that she's from that land, so she can use Cinder City, and Cinder City's broken. But yeah, because their attack buffs should be very, very similar to one another, right? Like, Sara's attack buff is at talent level 10, which we're going to use talent level 10 for now because we have the value at talent level 10 for Iansan. We don't have the one at talent level 13. So we're just going to do talent level 10 versus talent level 10 and assume that they scale somewhat similarly with talent levels. Alright, so it's 77% of her base attack, which is, with a 4-star weapon, 195 plus 565. And with a 5-star weapon, plus 674. Alright? This is 4-star weapon Sara. And then Iansan is upwards of 690. Right? The thing is, again, we don't know how much uptime you'll have on the full buff. And on characters that don't move, it's likely you're going to average much less than this. Alright, so that's the first thing to keep in mind. The second thing to keep in mind is that Sara's damage is only reliant on her base attack, which means that you don't get punished for having to build, or for building electro damage, for building crit rate, all of that. Iansan is based on her total attack, and in order to reach this buff, she needs a pretty good amount of it, which means you're going to have to effectively build less damage on her because you're going to need to skew her stats towards attack a bit more. And so even though Iansan seems to have slightly higher motion value, I don't expect Iansan to do more damage. I expect her to do a bit less because you're going to want to max out this passive. She also doesn't look like she has a lot of AoE, whereas Sara's burst AoE is pretty big. Given Iansan is coming out with Verisa, oh sorry, I didn't mean to say Verisa. With fucking Versatile, we can probably assume plunge counts for the moving part, right? Yeah, that's what I'm assuming right now. Yeah, you can do one dash before swapping to each character to stack something with Iansan buff. I mean, yeah, kind of. Why is he not saying Verisa? I think it's funnier to just say random words that start with V and have an R in them. I think my favorite one so far was valedictorian. Same energy as people not calling Benedict Cucumber or whatever his name is. Kind of, yeah. Kind of. You've made it less funny. Why did you say that? Why did you have to say that? Now it's less funny.